Unmute. Hi.
Hey, hi, can you hear me?
I can. It's just us, right? Nobody's
Just
up.
us. No, it's just us. We're good. You got a couple minutes.
I'm going to put on my lipstick. How's it
Yeah,
going?
I just did that. I'm great. How are you?
You're great.
I'm like working on the
Great.
mindset shift,
Wow.
How are you? You look good.
I am, is that even?
Yeah, looks good.
Is that too dark or is that okay?
Look, I put on dark stuff too. It's the holidays,
I'm all right. I was really crazy sick.
Oh, really?
So that was pretty terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got, sorry, I'm distracted. Okay.
It's okay.
Is my hair crazy or I'm okay? I'm good.
Looks so good.
Yeah, I was ridiculously ill. And then it turned out that I had a combination of a hiatal hernia, an intestinal infection, and celiac. I'm fucking celiac.
It's nice to find out now instead of when you're 15 or 6 or something. Yeah. Oh man, that's been a shift.
Yeah. So I was like there were a few weeks in October where I literally couldn't eat anything, like anything. I lost 25 pounds in October.
How much?
25. So thankfully I had the weight to lose. I had a friend actually who last year had a hiatal hernia and she lost also about 25 pounds. And she looked like she was a dead person. Like she looked so fragile and so, it was so upsetting. Like, so actually, as soon as I felt better, I was like, oh, I actually look pretty good.
Kind of like when you get the stomach flu. After a couple of days, you're like, oh,
I know, I look pretty
could
good.
Be worse.
Could be worse. But yeah, no, that was crazy. And now I can't eat gluten. Like that's fucking everything.
That's everything. And they always say like, there's so many more options now, but when you've lived 40 years eating
51.
Gluten, what? You're not.
Yeah, I'm 51.
I was going to give if you had asked, I would say like 43 to 45. I swear to God.
51.
It's amazing. I'm going to be 40 in May, so.
Amazing.
Okay, so let me start. Let's just have a conversation. I'm just going to start the process of taking us live to Facebook.
Am I good? Do I need to do any adjustments? You know how vain I am.
You look amazing. I love this thing. This wrap.
It's a wrap from Banana Republic, and I wish I'll stand up and I'll show you.
Yeah.
I wish. See, it's just like a.
Oh yeah. It looks like it's like a sweater when you're sitting like that.
They had it in like a kind of a like a light camel color.
Yes.
And I wish I had bought it.
They do a really nice job on camel.
Yeah.
I have a camel, like 2 things from there actually. And every time I'm like drawn to that color.
Yeah. Well, they have big sales right now. Things are like 50% off.
And we have the Banana Republic factory here, which is even better.
That's where I got this.
Like, $25 sold. And I'll buy one for you for Christmas and one for you for Christmas.
I know, but it looks really fancy now, right? Like,
yeah. And I like the color. Is it pink?
Yeah, it's a light.
Yeah, it's nice with your coloring, like your features. It's pretty. I like it.
Excellent.
So, are you taking any time off over the holidays?
Yes, I'm taking 2 weeks. I mean, it won't end up being a full 2 weeks off. Like,
no.
I'll have to clear out like old files and I'll have some reports, I'm sure. And I'm going to spend a full day answering emails so I don't come back to have like a nightmare. But how about you?
Yeah, I haven't decided. I'll probably take a week anyway. And then probably like a day here and there. I usually save most of my vacation to do over the holidays.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
RV. Sorry, I can't talk and type and spell at the same time.
That's a lot of pressure on you to do all that at the same time. No human can do all of that at the same time.
And recurrent and miscarriage or loss. Okay. And the nice thing is I can now share it to all of our pages as well. So everybody in like all of our 10 or 12 support groups gets notification we're going live, or they can go back and find it after, which is amazing.
Excellent. Actually, I should send you, I did a podcast. There's this organization called Life Speak.
Yeah.
And it's like an hour podcast.
Oh, can you send it to me and I'll publish it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
That too.
Okay, let me just make sure we're recording here. Yeah, we are. Okay, good. All right, I'm gonna hit live. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Figuring Out Fertility. I am Carolyn Dubé. I'm the Executive Director with Fertility Matters Canada. And I'm here today with a very good friend of mine and Fertility Matters, Dara Roth Edney. She's a reproductive counselor with Informed Fertility. And she's here to talk to us about coping and surviving the holidays when you have struggles with fertility and or you've experienced a loss, whether that's recent or not so recent. I'm really thrilled. Dara, thank you for being here and thank you for talking to us today about this really important topic. So many people in our community struggle through the month of December. So I'm really excited to help get them your voice today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this and for the work that you do, because it is, as you said, it's so important. There's so many people out there who feel so alone, and especially this time of year. And I think this year in general, and specifically, everyone feels more alone than usual. And that can definitely be exacerbated when you already were coming into this pandemic with some pretty significant feelings of isolation and loss and all of the things that go along with fertility issues. So thank you for having a platform that all of this can be talked about and where people cannot feel so alone.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. So why don't we start with, so for people in the fertility community, is this holiday season more challenging because of the pandemic? What are you hearing from your patients, and how do we help people get through these times?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that it probably won't be surprising to hear that with many things that there's sort of the both sides of the coin. So one of the things the pandemic has done is protected people from having to find a reason not to do things. So the things that usually people would feel either obligated to go to or have to come up with excuses not to attend, and then feel pressure from friends, family. So holiday gatherings, birthday parties, baby showers, Christmas, Hanukkah, like any of those sort of big kind of things, that there's often a lot of pressure, internal pressure from people themselves and pressure from family and friends to attend. So the pandemic for many of us has lifted that pressure because in fact, we're not supposed to be going out and gathering. So that has definitely been helpful in those ways. The thing that has become more difficult is the line between home and work has really been blurred now. So before the pandemic, in people's social lives, they had to navigate friends and family members who were pregnant, who were having babies. They had to navigate whether to attend things or how to get away from things quickly and how to protect themselves. But when they were home, and they could make a decision about if they were going to go somewhere for a walk but through a park where there was likely to be children or not, right? Like, within a certain amount of protection, obviously there's no avoiding some triggers, but you could make those choices when you're home.
Definitely.
When people started working online, people who had children were home with children. And so that line, I think for a lot of people over the course of this year has been really blurred, where the one place they might have felt safe and competent, right? Like we often feel like every part of ourselves is letting ourselves down, that we're not doing our best at work and we're failing at fertility and we're not present for our friends, we're not present for our family. But for some people, work has been a constant where they have felt like they could distract themselves and focus on something. And now all of a sudden in the middle of work meetings, they're seeing pictures of people's children, people's actual children in their laps, kids' voices, and pictures children have drawn in the background. So that I think for a lot of people has made this year even more difficult, that they don't have that separation that they used to have.
That's a very good point, because it's happened to me, and when I've been in meetings with people and I see kids pop in, I've had kids pop in, it's very challenging, and for someone who is struggling to see, or even just like you said, those family pictures on the wall behind someone can be very triggering, especially if you're meeting with that person on a really regular basis. A boss, a colleague, a family member. That's something that's very, very important. And most people wouldn't even think about that, especially if it's someone that's close to them, a colleague or a family member or friend. You wouldn't consider that. You wouldn't think about that necessarily.
Yeah, and a lot of the focus has been on people with young families in the sense of there's tons of newspaper articles about how challenging it is. I've had lots of clients who've said that people have said to them, "You're so lucky not to have kids. It's like a nightmare being home with my kids." And so that sort of idea, people expressing that it's brutal being home with their kids and it's a nightmare and it's so hard and it's so challenging. Not to say it's not, obviously it is. But that's obviously not appropriate to say to somebody who is struggling. But of course, not everybody knows that their friend or family member is struggling, right? So, but that definitely does cause a lot of issues and more isolation, where people feel like there are all these people who have these very public struggles balancing childcare, working from home, and they're considered that they're lucky that they don't have that, which is obviously, I think, a message that people who are going through fertility issues have heard in various ways around the luck of not having children and the way that people kind of use that and how awful that makes people feel.
Yeah, that's very, very important to consider. We also, when the pandemic first started, there was a lot of discussion and talk on, social media, especially about these COVID babies and this COVID whole cohort of babies that would be born 8 or 9 or 10 months after the pandemic or the lockdown started. So if there is, in fact, and I don't know that this is true, a cohort of babies that will be born, we're probably getting very close to when that could happen. So, so maybe more people within your networks could be quite far along in a pregnancy at this point as well.
Absolutely. And certainly for people who have struggled for so long and waited for so long, people who've had recurrent losses or people who haven't gotten pregnant, those cohort of people who have been able to successfully have a pregnancy and have a pregnancy continue, now they're having to give birth or have a surrogate give birth or whatever their situation is in a pandemic. So people who have waited years for this healthy baby to come now are maybe not allowed in the room when somebody is giving birth. They haven't been permitted to go to ultrasounds with a partner or with a surrogate. And then they haven't been able to have those baby showers. Like finally, there's somebody who's in a position to have the baby shower that they've been wanting and that they've been suffering through other people's, and they don't have that. So I think it's that double hit of the clinics being closed, not being able to pursue treatment. And then finally, when people were able to, they're missing out on a lot of the joys that they have waited so long for. So I think the pandemic has been a double, triple hit in so many ways.
A lot of treatment happening without partners, egg retrievals, a lot of that stuff happening.
Absolutely.
Missing that connection with your care team or your spouse. That's very,
and not
very
just
challenging.
The happy news of seeing the ultrasound, but going in for an ultrasound and having there be no heartbeat and your partner isn't there and you're by yourself. And constantly being the one, and this is obviously a familiar refrain, I think, constantly being the one to have to tell your partner that bad news because they're not in the room with you to get it also. So not only do you have the hit of taking that bad news on alone, you then have to go out and to your car or go back home and tell somebody else. And so, so people are doing, and it's for safety, it's for good reason. And I think certainly most of the people I speak to really do seem to understand that clinics are doing this because it's the best way to make sure clinics stay open.
That's right. Absolutely.
Safety protocols. So certainly the impression I've got from the people that I speak to is that everybody understands it, but it doesn't make it easier to go through these joys and these heartbreaks alone. And when people are doing things like egg donation and surrogacy, there is that additional level, where surrogates are not having intended parents there for her, and intended parents are, not even one of the intended parents is there for those ultrasounds and those kinds of things. So all of that becomes so much more challenging for everybody.
Wow, it is very impactful within this community, this pandemic for sure. So as we prepare for, now we're into December and we're preparing for, whether they're virtual celebrations or not.
Yeah.
How do people protect themselves? What are some steps that patients who are struggling, how can they protect themselves? How can they make themselves kind of move through the next several weeks without too much more isolation or challenging feelings and those types of things?
So I think I'd say that there's a couple of things. One is sometimes it can be helpful to recognize that this just is hard, right? Mm-hmm. That the goal, therefore, of trying to make it better is useful. Trying to make it all okay may be more than is manageable for some people. And that's okay too. I think we've especially during this pandemic heard that idea of like, it's okay not to be okay. Mm-hmm. So I absolutely think that there are specific steps people can take to make things better for themselves, to make things less painful, and maybe even to have and find some moments of joy and peace. I also think it's important not to have expectations that are unrealistic. This has been a brutal year for everybody. It's been especially difficult for people who coming into the pandemic already had zapped resources and already were dealing with loss and sorrow and grief. And so coming into this with lower strength and lower resilience is not an ideal way to go into a pandemic. And then, of course, not only does the end of the year represent holidays and times where everybody around you is supposedly joyful, and pictures of kids in matching pajama sets and all of that, it's also representative of another year passing without the dream that you've been waiting for, without that success that you've been hoping for. So the end of the year isn't just that sort of what Christmas means to people, what holidays mean to people. It is also, of course, very specific around that kind of another Christmas, another Hanukkah, another year, another one. So I think it is important to give yourself some grace around that and to recognize that this sounds odd, but like you've earned how terrible you feel, like that's from nowhere. And so again, it's useful to try and find ways to make yourself feel better, but that it's also okay not to feel obligated to be okay, not to feel obligated to find a way to just be happy. This is a tough time.
Definitely.
So as part of that, I think being really proactive about your self-care. So by that, I mean, we hear ideas of self-care, take a bath or go do this or have, listen to a podcast or go for a walk. And I think everybody has self-care things that they do themselves. And so I'm certainly not here to prescribe a self-care methodology to somebody. But I would say that sometimes what happens is that by the time we think of taking that self-care into practice, we are already depleted. So looking ahead at the month ahead and saying, okay, this is when my office is having a virtual Christmas party. This is when my so-and-so is having a this, and this is when this is happening. And so you can look at that calendar and perhaps anticipate some of the times that are going to be more stressful. You can decide if you have 4 family gatherings virtual, is it necessary to attend all of them? Is it necessary to attend all of them for the entire duration of them? Can you have an escape clause? Like, can you find a way to have a doorbell ring or another call come through or get up to go to the bathroom or take something off the stove? Like, are there things that you can do to break some of that up? And so looking at the calendar and being really proactive about that. If you know that you have an event that might be triggering, then doing what you can to make sure that after that, you have some free time, that you're not going from that into a big work meeting.
Right. So that's a great piece of advice.
And I actually make that suggestion around cycle treatments as well. That kind of looking ahead to your IVF cycle or looking ahead to when you're going in for an ultrasound, looking at your calendar and really trying to anticipate, is it possible that this is going to be a stressful day or a stressful week? And of course, for a lot of people, they can tell when it's going to be because it's, as they say, not their first rodeo. Like they can anticipate what is going to be difficult. And sometimes you're surprised, but sometimes you're not. You know that it's going to be hard. So looking at that calendar and making a plan for the before and after that event and making a decision about what you're going to do that might help you prepare for it and then kind of shake it off a little bit afterwards. So planning in advance for what you need and when you might need it.
Would people take a list or an inventory of the things? Like, do you recommend people write down things that they enjoy, things that they'd like to accomplish this holiday season in terms of, for me, it's sitting with my Christmas lights on and watching girly holiday movies. I love that. And that brings me joy, like writing out a list and then maybe figuring out, instead of leaving it, like you said, till last minute and then trying to figure out what you actually should be doing to take some self-care.
So I think that's a great thought process in terms of planning for that. I'd say a couple of things. One of the big things that I think can be useful when anybody is suffering is letting go of some expectations. Okay. So I think noticing when you're using language like should or have to or need to, and really just asking yourself, what are some expectations I can let go of? Like that idea that I should attend this, or I have 2 weeks off, I should clean up the house, or I need to blah, 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 right? So finding a way to adjust some of those expectations so that your focus this time of year is, for lack of a better word, selfish, that you are, you deserve and have a responsibility to yourself, to protect yourself, to take care of yourself. So really looking at what it is that you're expecting of yourself and seeing if there are some adjustments that can be made to let go of some of those things.
I like what you said, taking, like you have a responsibility to yourself. And there's probably some people, when they hear that, that's a great way to think about it. For someone who might struggle with kind of making themselves a priority or taking that time or letting some things go. When you think about being responsible to yourself and your self-care and your health, your mental health, reproductive health, putting it back as a responsibility is a good way to look at it.
Absolutely. And sometimes I think people have a hard time, as you said, kind of taking that in. And one of, right at the start of this talk today, you mentioned the idea of losses and people who've had a loss. And certainly I think, and I think most people listening know that one of the things with fertility treatment and going through the challenges of trying to have a baby is that there's actually untold numbers of losses. So there's the physical, the actual reproductive loss, the loss of a baby, but there's countless other losses along the way. And so often people feel very badly, very guilty that they are not, they're not as productive at work, or they're not the friend that they used to be, or they're not the daughter or the partner, that they just don't have that kind of energy. And certainly one of the things that I do like to emphasize to people is I think everybody on this planet at some point in their life will not be the best that they can be. And right now for people, some people, it's fertility. For other people, maybe they had a pet die, or something terrible happened in their marriage, or a loved one is very ill, or they're very ill, or, all of us as human beings cannot operate at 100% the best of our capacity all of the time. And so for people going through fertility struggles, this is your time. This is the time when for you might not be able to operate at 100%. And that's okay. Just like if you found out that a colleague had cancer, or their wife just left them, or their parent was ill, you would also understand that they couldn't be as 100%.
Absolutely.
So that idea of being responsible also means that you then have the capacity to understand if somebody else isn't 100%. And it means that if you are operating at 70% and you're giving yourself that leeway to do that, it means that 70% can actually be the best 70% it can be, instead of fighting yourself to be 100% where things are dropping even more.
Okay. That's great advice. I love that piece of advice. And I think that that's so important to anybody who's listening at whatever stage they are in their life. And also a reminder for people watching to say, it's okay to give someone grace, and remember that, if you know someone that's struggling, remembering that this time, especially, maybe to back off, or to just have a little bit of grace and let them get through the next 4 or 5 weeks. And then hopefully things can.
And to remember that actually, despite what we see in social media, and despite what we see in those Christmas movies, which I must admit I also love, actually this time of year is really hard for a lot of people.
Yeah.
It's hard for a lot of single people who don't have a partner. It's hard for people that our community that we're talking about who don't have a child or another child. It's hard for people who are celebrating holidays with loved ones far away or loved ones who have passed away. It's like, this is actually, and I think we instinctively know that, except for maybe a magical year when you were 22. This is actually, for a lot of people, holidays and the emphasis and the assumption that everybody is happy. These holidays and New Year's, for a lot of people, are actually really painful. So it's also useful to remember that nobody here is alone in feeling that this is your own experience might be unique to you, but a feeling of isolation or loneliness or sort of like not in balance with the way it feels like everybody else is. You know, those social media pictures are not real. And certainly in terms of being proactive, and going back to your initial question, which I think I sort of took a sideways answer to, being proactive about how you're going to consume social media over the holidays, I think, is really important. Everybody, if you think about it, will know that, using Christmas as an example, which is sort of the biggest holiday this time of year, that, you know, the 24th and the 25th and the 26th, feeds are going to be full of family pictures and kids and Christmas trees. You know, Hanukkah, I'm Jewish, and it's just, the holiday isn't as big and it lasts 8 days. So it's not, but it's just, the truth is, it's just not the same kind of scale as Christmas. But I think all of us can agree that we can, again, be proactive, looking at what are likely to be times that maybe it's actually healthier to take a step back from social media. And I also just want to touch on, you know, you had used an example for yourself about, you know, sitting on the couch and watching those movies, and if I had any specific advice around that. And the suggestion that I have for people is to, whatever your own self-care list is, make it as specific as you can. So I'll give you an example. I could say that I really love walking my dogs. I have 2 dogs, and I adore them and I love walking them. But the truth is that if I take my phone with me when I'm walking my dogs, I'm talking to a girlfriend on the phone, or I'm checking email, or I'm checking Facebook. And then when I come home, the dogs have gotten walked, but I actually haven't really done anything for me. As opposed to, if I leave my phone at home, I'm focused on my dogs and how they play and how adorable they are. I'm noticing if a neighbor walks by and I say hello. I'm noticing the weather. I'm engaged in what I'm actually doing. And so it's actually not true that walking my dogs does something for my mental health. Walking my dogs without my phone does something for my mental health.
Wow, that's very powerful.
And I think that's true even if you use your Christmas sort of movie. There's, I imagine, a difference if you are sitting with your favorite whatever cup of hot chocolate with maybe a little bit of Bailey's in it, with your favorite blanket, watching a movie when you have nothing else to do, versus if it's sort of shoved in between things that you know you're supposed to do. Maybe there's even a room in your house that you prefer watching a movie in. Maybe a pair of pajamas that are more comfortable, or a pair of sweatpants, right? So there's always a way that we can think of the sort of blanket activity, and then try and narrow it down. Like, what specifically about that activity is the most helpful?
That's very, very good advice. Because you're right. I would enjoy a movie more if I left my cell phone in the kitchen, instead of feeling like I should. And maybe it's not that I feel like I should. I just, it's that social addiction to connecting and looking and sharing. And then next thing you know, the credits are rolling. So that's a great advice.
Half the movie on Facebook answering a couple of work emails.
Absolutely.
You haven't just been engaged in what it is that you set out to do.
Definitely. That's great advice for anybody. I think that's so important. Yeah. Okay. So I guess in terms of for people who have experienced loss, I want to touch on that a little bit. Whether it's a single miscarriage, recurrent loss, we talked about this time being really lonely. For people who have experienced loss, is there some advice we have for them to survive this time of year? And separately from that, for someone who has a child or children and then has experienced a loss, this time is probably, it's really joyful in some ways, and yet they're still dealing internally, and maybe with a partner, or even for some of the children, dealing with a loss. I know those are probably maybe some loaded questions, but I'd love to maybe talk a little bit about that.
Okay, so, I think that they're two separate categories. So somebody who is experiencing or has experienced loss or recurrent loss who does not yet have children, and somebody who's experiencing it and who has children. So I'm going to sort of separate those categories. And to be clear, not because one is more or less painful, but because they are quite different experiences, and also you have a different set of responsibilities. So the truth is that when you're experiencing a loss or recurrent losses and it's you on your own or you with your partner, you have a different capacity for managing that than if actually you have a child that you are still responsible for. That it's just a different experience. So to speak to, let's say, the first, people who do not yet have children who are experiencing loss, some of it is stuff that I'm sure people have heard before, making a decision in advance about, is there something you want to do to mark the loss of that baby? For some people, that has to do with religious beliefs. For some people, it has to do with when the loss occurred. So, you know, having a loss at 11 weeks versus having a loss at 8 months. You know, so what that was and what that means to you. For some people, they do find this time of year having some kind of concrete marker of it. And so whether that's planting something or saying a prayer or having a moment. But certainly one of the things that is there are so many things that are brutally painful about loss. But one of them is that it is, and I think people have heard this before, it's a loss that isn't really recognized. When somebody is here on this earth and they die, there are rituals, there are religious rituals, there are societal rituals. People respond, people are there for you. You can talk about it. You can mention it, and people, they might be uncomfortable because people are uncomfortable with death, but it's not surprising if somebody mentions it.
Of course.
But when you have a miscarriage or you have a stillbirth, there aren't those rituals around. And it can feel really quite terrible to know that you are the only person who remembers this life that meant something so much to you, and all of those dreams that were wrapped up in it. And that is true for both of those categories, just both of those categories of people, with or without children. And so making a decision on your own or with your partner, is there something that would feel meaningful to you to recognize what that meant to you and what that being was to you, or not? Or do you feel like that was brutal? That was a miscarriage, that was a D&C, that wasn't a baby. I don't want to think about it that way. I want to move forward and not think about it. That's okay too.
Yeah.
My big hope for the people that I see, and for people in this audience that are listening now, is that people make purposeful decisions about what it is that they need. And that goes back to that idea of being proactive, right? So that you aren't just operating blind, that you are taking a moment to think, what would make me feel better? Not what would make me feel good, but what will take me from here to maybe here. If I'm at a 5, what will take me to a 7? If I'm at a 2, what might take me to a 5? Like, how can I just pull up a little bit? And so really thinking about that kind of thing in terms of marking something or purposely making a decision to not think about it or talk about it. For people who have children, one of the things that can be really difficult this time of year is feeling incredibly guilty about having any kind of joy. And that's true all through the year. So I shouldn't have said that it was just this time of year. To have a loss and to have to pretend to be happy, to have a late term loss, a stillbirth, and to have moments when you're not thinking about that loss and you're actually just enjoying the moment with a child that you have, can feel horrifying, as though you're, ignoring the memory of this baby that you loved. And so being able to recognize that as human beings, that idea of a responsibility to ourselves, that includes opening our hearts to moments of joy, whether you are alone or partnered, whether you have children or not. If you had a loss and you have a child, it is your responsibility to still find joy with that child you have. And it's also the best way to honor the baby that you lost, to live a life that's joyful. And so for anybody, regardless of whether they have children or whether they don't, to be able to find moments of peace. And that goes back to what I said earlier about making an adjustment, right? I'm not talking about being happy this time of year, which maybe some people can do, and amazing. But happy always feels to me like it's this place you're supposed to get to. Like you're supposed to work hard and get to happy.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're there, you're meant to stay there. And if you don't stay there, it's because you're not trying enough. You're not being positive enough. You're not doing enough, whatever, to stay there. And I know that when I was going through infertility, there was just no way I could ever have gotten to happy. Like, it just was not a possibility. And I've had other dark times in my life where that's just not a realistic thing.
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, finding moments of joy or moments of peace, that is possible. And so when you look at what can you do over this holiday season, or what goals can you set for yourself within still the context of lowering or adjusting expectations, to say, is it possible that I can find some moments of peace, so that, let's say in January, when I look back on this holiday season, I'm not feeling like the entire time was devastating. That maybe I'm remembering, you know what? I did sit cuddled up with somebody I love, my pet, my partner, a child, if you have a child already, and we did watch a wonderful movie for 2 hours. That did distract me. I had a great video call with a girlfriend who understands me. That felt really good. I slept in one morning, and that was delightful. So
Yeah.
these are small things. They are not going to change the context of what you're going through. They are not going to make everything better. They are not going to make you happy. But if in a 12-hour or 14-hour period that you're awake, you've had a half an hour of a yoga practice and 2 hours of watching a movie, you went for a 20-minute run, those moments add up. Those moments of feeling at peace or feeling connected to your body, doing something that felt good,
Mm-hmm.
those can add up. And so that's the idea.
Wow, that's very powerful. Some really, really good tidbits in there. Because I feel like when you said you can feel guilty for not honoring, for feeling like you may be forgetting or not mourning the loss of a child, or having a miscarriage. I mean, that's incredibly important. And just finding the moments, I think that's key. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be joyful all the time. Just little bits of time, finding those things and taking the time to schedule or plan for enjoying some of those things.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Wow, very, very important. Thank you for that information. So is there anything else that you can think that's important for patients to know or to consider, over the coming weeks?
Yeah. So I think still within the same kind of context of some of the themes that we've talked about, I think back to the idea of self-preservation, setting limits.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that there's so many areas in life where we wouldn't expect people not to have a boundary. But somehow with this, and I think especially for women, we often feel like we don't have the right to set those limits, or we have a responsibility to the other people in our lives, that we need to put other people first. We need to consider other people first. And I think there's definitely a time for that, but there's also a time for this. And so really seeing if there are limits that are important for you to protect yourself, to protect your mental health, to protect your relationship if you have a partner, and even to think about, realizing that if you don't set a limit with your parent or your sibling or a friend, that actually you will blow up at them. That in fact it is protective of that relationship to set that boundary, to know what you can manage. So I think trying to think through what are some limits that are important for you.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I find is that often people put a lot of energy into trying to get people to understand. So I'll give you an example. Let's say you have a video call for a holiday event, and family from all across the country or all across the world are joining in on this Zoom call, and it's been planned and everybody is set up for it, and you just feel like you actually can't do it. You know that there's going to be a number of people there who are pregnant or there's going to be a ton of young kids, and it's going to be overwhelming and noisy, and it just feels like more than you can manage. Mm-hmm. And you try and explain that you won't be able to be there, and people don't understand. And they say things to you like, no, we won't just talk about the kids, and everybody's going to want to be updating on themselves, and you don't have to focus on that part of the family, and everybody will miss you. And and so sometimes people will then just cave in and just participate. Other times people will just keep trying to get people to understand. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I know I discovered myself when I was going through my own journey was that there's a difference between support and understanding. So The best thing is when somebody understands you. They can be empathetic, they absolutely understand, and they support you with what you need. But somebody doesn't have to understand you to support you. So if you feel like you can't do something and you say to somebody, and this doesn't work with every family, obviously, but if you have a loving family who generally wants to help, but just don't know how, and who do know that you're struggling, but even if they don't know why you're struggling, you can actually say to somebody, I know it doesn't make sense to you why I can't participate, but haven't I proven in my lifetime that I'm a responsible person who makes good choices, who knows what's best for me? Like, do you know me to be somebody who just doesn't do the things that I'm expected to do, who just doesn't show up for family? So if you know me to be a responsible, loving part of this family, and I'm telling you I can't do this, I just need you to support that and respect that. And sometimes that actually, not always, but sometimes that can work, because it's just saying, it's okay that you don't understand. I'm just asking you to trust me that this is what I need. And I just need you to support that this is what I need. That's
great language. Really, really good. And that's I think for people watching who are struggling with that or anticipate having to struggle with that language puts the power back in their hands. And, sometimes our loved ones just they need us to tell us exactly what we need. And sometimes we don't know exactly what we need. But I think that's an excellent example of language to say, just trust me that I know what I need. And the best way to support me is to just trust.
Yeah. And also to kind of let them off the hook a little bit, like, if you don't understand, and to let yourself off the hook. You have limited resources and limited energy. You don't have to keep spending it on the same person trying to explain and then having your heart broken again and again when they don't understand. Of course. And so it's sort of letting everybody off the hook to say, it's okay that you don't understand. You just need to trust me that this is what I need. Yeah, that's right. I'm just looking at, I don't mean to look down, I'm just looking at some of the comments that have come in on our Facebook. It's tough when this is a comment that's come in, it's tough when you have pictured having Christmas with a baby and no baby here at Christmas. That's a difficult pill to swallow. That is, I think difficult is obviously an understatement. It's brutal, it's devastating, and it fills people with a deep sense of despair, especially if this is not the first Christmas without that baby, but the second or the fifth or the sixth. There's no doubt that it is a very, very, very difficult thing. Agreed. I know it's hard to find hope in moments like this and in times like this when things have been so bad and where it feels like the things that you've tried have not been successful. Sometimes it can be helpful for some people to remember that you don't yet know what's going to happen. And when there's a difference between not having a child and not having a child yet, not having a baby and not having a baby yet. I had a client say something to me actually that was very powerful. And so to the person who wrote that comment, I don't know if this will speak to you or to anybody else. It certainly resonated with me. She said that she used to think about it like a baby. Like she would see other people pregnant and other people with children. And she would think like, when am I going to have my baby? When am I going to have a baby? Right? Like everybody else has a baby. When am I going to have a baby? And that it's another year without a baby. And then at one point she shifted that to my baby. And it was very powerful for her, and her describing this to me was quite powerful for me, because she said what the experience was that then when other people were pregnant or other people had a baby, it made it very clear to her, like that was their baby and that she was waiting for her baby. And that if you use that language, and that's not something everybody can do. And I'm not saying that anybody should do this. I'm just putting this out there as maybe this resonates with somebody, that the language of my baby means that there is a baby that is yours, that is for you. So when I think about that in the context of my experience, and I think about the more than 5 years of us trying before we got to surrogacy, and then another year before we had our daughter through surrogacy, all of those times of trying, all of those times of trying on my own, all of those IUIs, all of those IVFs, all of those, it wasn't just that I wasn't having a baby. It was that it wasn't my baby. Right. And so my baby had to come to me in that time, through that process, with that egg and that sperm and that surrogate. And that's what brought me my baby. And so I remember very well all those years and months and birthdays and holidays passing without a baby. But thinking about it and thinking about it in terms of my baby, it does open the door to maybe a little spark of hope that if there is such a thing as my baby, then that means there is my baby.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that it is possible that next year will be different.
Absolutely. That's a really, really lovely piece of advice. And I think that there will be many people that are watching that will resonate with. So thank you.
And again, I do want to be clear, like, I never suggest that something resonates with everybody.
No.
And I can remember helpful things people sometimes would say to me that would make me actually like did not find that helpful, did the opposite instead of instilling hope. So definitely want to make it clear that it's not for everybody. But again, that really resonated with me. And clearly it was very meaningful to this particular client, who it really helped her feel not as hopeless. And it made her feel not as bitter. And it made her feel like she was putting herself through all of that pain, all of that financial hits, all of that physical pain, all of those needles, like she was doing all of that for a reason. And it made her feel more confident in that reason. And I thought that was really beautiful.
I think that that's very beautiful. Thank you for sharing that story. This is a comment from the same person in response to your comments here. Good points. I have lost 2 now. I have 1 beautiful child that is 5 and he's my world. I'm still praying for a second, but I'm 38. So these are wonderful supportive comments. Thank you. So that's hopefully helpful. Just a couple of other comments just for you. This is so helpful. Self-preservation and doing what you can to make it better, not good, just better. That's really awesome. And then great words, Dara, wishing everyone struggling out there peace during this holiday season. That's from Heather Brooks, our friend.
Thank you, Heather.
So thank you, Dara, for today. I've taken some of your words personally, and I think that's or to heart, and I will be using some of your tips myself this holiday season. And I know that people who are watching will take pieces of what they heard today to help them find moments of peace and joy, contentment, hope over the next few weeks. So thank you so much for your time today. It's always a pleasure. It's always such a learning experience. So if you're out there and you're interested in connecting with Dara, please connect with us, or you can find her at Informed Fertility. She'd be happy to connect with you. So please consider yourselves taking some responsibility to forgive yourself this holiday and allow yourself some time and some self-reflection and self-care. It's okay not to be okay. Thank you so much, Dara. And for everybody who's tuned in live, and for all of you who will be watching this on the replay, thank you so much for joining us for another episode of Figuring Out Fertility, where we speak to Canadian fertility experts to bring you the information and resources you need to make informed decisions about your reproductive health. A reminder that Fertility Matters Canada is a registered Canadian charity, and so we rely on the generous donations of people just like you to help us be able to bring these resources to you for free. So in this time of giving, if you're looking for a charity to donate to, please consider Fertility Matters Canada. You can find all the information on our homepage of fertilitymatters.ca. Thank you so much, everybody. We'll be talking to you again next week.
Thank you so much,
Sarah.
Take care.
Bye. Bye.